And Jordan paid for it very dearly.
Well, I wasn't even realize this. The Eichmann was the last time the Supreme Court of Israel actually made the right decision.
It's funny because you know how Israel they're so humane, they don't kill people. So there's it's on my when I turned on YouTube yesterday. So the front video was a video depicting the capital punishment of Eichmann, and Jews don't know how to kill, right? They're so humane, so they couldn't figure out how to use the gallows. They had never used it before, and they were struggling with it. And it took like 5 weeks of modifying it until they can get it to work, and they still couldn't get it to work. So finally, Eichmann says, "You know what? You guys are such losers. You can't do anything. Give it to me. I'll do it myself." And then he hanged himself. Which is a very cute depiction of what happened. Okay, so let's see the head of the Gemara. So we're still sort of in the middle here. So yesterday we really should quickly give a chazara of the whole Gemara from yesterday, just to get recap what we learned yesterday. So yesterday we learned about sewing. Right, we learned about sewing up a hole, about 2 stitches. We learned about who you're not allowed to learn Torah from. You're not allowed to learn anything from an amgush, and it was machlokes if that's a kishuf macher, or if that's someone who kushes their voice shloim. We learned about someone who could learn about astronomy and astrology should learn because we're chochmas ha'amim. We have to show that we know everything. Then we learned about tzod. We learned that if you squeeze the chalozim, if there's an isser of dash on it, or maybe there isn't. Then we learned about tzviya. We learned that shchita would be ashal tzviya. There's no specific malacha of shchita. It's just netilas neshama. So there's a shayla if you're chayiv for tzviya, and the benefit of tzviya is to show that it's either kosher meat or that it's fresh meat. And then we learned halacha l'maisa stuff. We learned about moileach and how it is also called ma'abed. And there was a shayla. We learned that when you put salt on a salad, you should only put salt on the salad if there's oil on it first, because the oil will not allow it to suck the moisture out of the leaf. And when you're eating stuffed vegetables, you should dip one vegetable at a time into salt. You shouldn't salt a whole bunch of vegetables. We learned about memachik. You're not allowed to smoothen out earth. And we also learned that you're not allowed to rub mud off your shoes on the grass. You could only rub mud off the shoes on maybe a sharp step or a wall, but not on grass. And then we learned about sharpening sticks, which is mechatach. And we learned about mareach, putting an ointment on is not allowed. We learned about makom patish is not allowed, and that was the issue of making glass kalim. It's only makom patish because there's no binyan by kalim. And then we learned about writing. We learned that if you erased a letter, even though you only erased one letter, if you can write 2 letters in that place, you're over out mechika. For ksiva, you actually have to write 2 full letters. So that was one of the chumras of meichik over kaisef. Then we learned about makom patish, and then we learned about Reb Yehuda, who added additional steps in the weaving process as independent malachas, which our Gemara didn't hold of, because our Mishnah holds that they're included in the other malachas. The small mini steps that Reb Yehuda adds to the list, our Tanakama holds are part of the standard steps of weaving. Okay. Now we're getting up to the sheer of how big something has to be for you to be over of a Shabbos. So our Mishnah says.
Yes.
Yes.
Can you just give an example of a current day example of makom patish, and how it relates to the original example?
If you buy a new suit, and there's some threads sticking out of it, so the halacha is you're not allowed to cut those threads off, because that would be finishing off your suit. That would be a typical example of makom patish. So you don't like that example.
That's not that's not separate from a different Isser, a different malacha. You have the malacha of cutting. Is there a makav b'patish example where
Well, there's no issue to cut. You're not allowed to cut something to size, but cutting a loose thread or pulling out a loose thread, there's no malacha for that.
pulling out the loose thread?
Yeah. The issue of mechatech is you're cutting something to a specific size. Just cutting something, I don't think is mechatech. If you're cutting something to size, there's a problem with mechatech. Well, but for sure, pulling out a thread wouldn't be, but that it would be makav b'patish. If you wouldn't,
It wouldn't be considered mechuber, like the wheat stalk to the ground.
not growing from the ground,
It's mechuber.
unless you crawled out from under a rock with it or something. Okay, so
that's an example of something that you're not over mach. I want to know something that you're over mach and patish, but you're not over something else to rabbanon. You're not
pulling
over
loose threads out of a new garment.
but not cutting it off the new garment.
No, cutting it off the new garment as well.
So
Cutting a loose thread off a new garment.
So if there's 4 threads out of your loose garment and you only cut 3 with a scissor, you're not over any midrabanan, not over anything at all, and it's not mach and patish.
Well, if you're cutting it with a scissor, then you would be over because a scissor smokes it.
Okay, a knife.
But there's no malachas.
A knife.
That's right.
A knife. Okay.
When you cut the 4th, it's makav b'patish because you completed because that's what the tailor would have done before he delivered your suit.
That's right.
But if the kapata is anyways too large, it's still mach and patish.
The kapata is starting to get too small, actually.
The makav b'patish was a personal. That's my last thing that I have to do for Chabad is to put the kapata on. That's the makav b'patish. It's a spiritual makav b'patish.
No, you're still.
Let's see if we can find other examples of makav b'patish, more practical examples.
Can it apply to food if you put the last something on food?
I don't think so. No.
It would only be to kalim, right?
Yeah. Let me see if he has examples of makav b'patish. He definitely speaks about it. Let's see what he has over here. Let's see. Lots more examples.
I know in my business it's called the last nail in the coffin, right?
That's exactly what it is.
That's right.
Let's see if he speaks about makav b'patish here. It doesn't talk about all malachas. So I don't have other examples. Okay, so let's see what we have over here. Now then we ended off the day yesterday talking about the Mishnah that talks about the minimum shear to be over Shabbos. So if you have a granule of salt in your pocket and you walked out on Shabbos and you carried it from Shush to Shush, you're not over. There has to be some critical mass. There has to be something significant that you're actually taking out. So the rule that the Mishnah says, the rule that Tana of our Mishnah says, is that if it's something that normal people hold on to, and the amount of the substance that you're carrying is a normal amount that people would hold on to, then there'll be a chiyuv. But if it's not a normal amount, then there would be no chiyuv. So let's use salt for an example, and I don't know that this is accurate halachically, but let's say a teaspoon of salt is what's considered significant. So since most normal people would save a teaspoon of salt, so a teaspoon of salt, if you carried it out, you'd be over. Less than that, you wouldn't be over. But the Mishnah says, if you are makbid even on less than a teaspoon of salt, and you do consider that choshev, then you're not even allowed to carry out less than a teaspoon of salt. And again, I'm not saying that a teaspoon of salt is the shear. I'm just using the teaspoon of salt as an example. So the Gemara then discussed what someone wouldn't keep, what people don't like. We discussed to choose damnido or it's ateshera. But what I want to focus on is all the way to the bottom of the laomer Reb Yossi Simon. Hi, the loy Reb Shimon. This Mishnah is not going according to Reb Shimon. The Ikar Reb Shimon, because Reb Shimon would argue, and Reb Shimon says, the Ikar Reb Shimon ha'amar loy amru kol ashur malolu elu masniyim. So there's really two ways in which Reb Shimon argues on our Mishnah. And I want to just, yesterday when we finished the Gemara, I wasn't crystal clear in what those two ways are. So now I want to clarify them. So the first way that Reb Shimon argues on our Mishnah is our Mishnah says that our Mishnah says in the first halacha, it says that if you have, let's say, a teaspoon of salt that most people value, anybody who carries that teaspoon of salt out is chayiv al tzeitzah. Even a very wealthy person who might not value a teaspoon of salt. So on that, Reb Shimon argues and says, a teaspoon of salt, if you're not machshav a teaspoon of salt, then you're potter if you carry it out. So even though, so what Reb Shimon says is, and he says it in the next Mishnah, that a revius is the amount that's usher for everybody. Less than a revius is only usher to somebody who values it. So our Tanakama learns that if Roiv the oilam is machshav something, so if a teaspoon of salt is valuable by most people, then it's usher to carry that outside for all people. Shimon holds no. A revius is usher for all people. A smaller amount that most people would value, only those people who value it may not carry it out. But a wealthy person who doesn't value it could carry it out, and his threshold is a revius. That's the first way in which Reb Shimon argues on the Mishnah. The second way in which Reb Shimon argues on the Mishnah is the second one. Reb Shimon would hold that everybody would be chayiv. The Leslie Reb Shimon kol she'ein kosher latzniya ve'im matin kamoi she's chayiv olav matniyah. So he holds that. So he would argue on the second half of the Mishnah, and he holds even if you'll agree to carry out something that's small, Reb Shimon disagrees with this, and he holds that the minimum shear that you'll be chayiv for carrying is something that most people would carry, but something that only you'll carry, even you're going to be potter for. So again, just to review, there's two ways where Reb Shimon argues from the Tanakh. A, he holds that the threshold for everybody is a revius. Anything less than that is only for people who'll carry that amount, and smaller than the amount that most people will carry, nobody's chayiv for. So there's three shurim, according to Reb Shimon. The revius is mechayiv everybody. If it's a teaspoon of salt that most people are machshav, that will only be mechayiv somebody who's machshav a teaspoon of salt, and someone who's even machshav less than the teaspoon of salt doesn't matter. The minimum shear is still going to be that teaspoon. While the Tanakama holds that the shear that most people carry will be usher to everybody, even people who don't value that shear. And the Tanakama also holds that less than that shear, any tiny amount, if I machshav it, then I'll be chayiv for it. So those are the two places where Reb Shimon argued on our Mishnah. There's a chart from the Art Scroll that I know Akiva loves to see, but it's not consistent with how I'm learning, so it could be confusing. But we'll look at the chart anyway, because there's one more. The reason why I want to focus on this is because there's going to be a third sheet as well that we're about to learn. So our Mishnah says, if it's a small amount that a normal person doesn't use, only the person that uses that small amount, only that person will have an isser to carry that small amount. And again, as we said, this Shimon argues on that, and he holds that if it's something that most people don't value, no matter what, you won't be chayiv for it. So now let's see what the Gemara says in the Sefer Mishnah. Omer Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, "Ha, the loy Reb Shimon ben Elazar." This halacha is not consistent with Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Now again, what does our Tanakama say? That if it's a smaller amount than what most people use, if you're machshav it, you'll be chayiv if you carry it, but anybody else who carries it will not be chayiv. The Tanya, Klal Omer Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Kol she'ein kosher latzniya. If it's a small amount or something that people wouldn't save, so either ein kosher latzniya, it's something that people wouldn't save, or ve'ein matniya kamayu, or it's too small of an amount, so nobody would save that small amount. But the huchshel is that. But Ruvain Reuben does value even a half a teaspoon of salt. And he put away that half a teaspoon of salt. So we already know that if he carries it out, he's chayiv, according to Tanna Kama. If somebody else carries it out, they're potter because they're not machshavit. But Reb Shimon Elazar says that if I put away a half a teaspoon of salt, and another guy who's not machshav this half a teaspoon of salt, but he took my teaspoon of salt that I'm machshav, since this is choshev to me, it's my salt, even though you're not machshav a half a teaspoon of salt, but if you carry out that half a teaspoon of salt, you'll be chayiv because I was machshav. So here, my machshava on a small bit of salt is able to impact you because my salt was choshev because I made it choshev. Now, whether you think it's choshev or not is irrelevant. If you take it out, you're going to be chayiv. Now, the Tanna Kama avad is moida. If you carry that half a teaspoon of salt out for me, if I ask you, do me a favor, can you take this salt for me? And you're doing it for me, there everybody agrees that the third party is chayiv. The chiddush of Shimon Elazar is even if a third party takes it out for himself, nothing to do with the owner, he's still going to be chayiv because this salt now became choshev because its owner was machshavit. So let's have a quick look at the art scrolls. He has a chart.
Yes, just to clarify. So it's only a problem when the person takes it. Let's say the wealthier person takes it from the poorer person. It's only when he continues that action, not if he carries it out on his own, right? You understand what I'm trying? You're saying
that's correct. In other words, it's only that teaspoon of salt that's in this guy's house that he was machshav. But the wealthy guy in his house, his teaspoon of salt has no problem.
Right. Okay. Fine.
In other words, I could be machshav something that I own, and now anybody who uses it or touches it or moves it will be chayiv. But I can't make a half a teaspoon in your house.
Right. So the example was the poor person took it from his own house, was walking the street, met the rich person, gave it over to him. The rich person, even though he doesn't care about it, is still over because he's carrying something that the poor person values.
According to Shimon Elazar, that's correct.
Okay. Well, that was the case that we just said, right?
That's right. That's correct. Okay, so let's look at the chart. So the Tanna Kama of our Mishnah holds something that you would not normally keep. So the halacha is if it's something that you would keep, so a stored item, so any amount that you would keep would be osir, and if it's less than that, so the minimum amount means the threshold. Something that most people would value would be osir for all people, right? But something that, so I'm using the example of a half of a teaspoon. A teaspoon of salt is something that everyone would be machshav. Therefore, it's osir for all people to carry that mishus l'shus. But a half a teaspoon of salt, which most people aren't machshav, but only this guy is machshav, then it's only osir for the person himself to carry out. Going to Shimon Elazar, because I just talked about that with David, is on the according to Shimon Elazar, if I'm machshav any amount, it's going to be osir for everybody. So my salt, my half a teaspoon of salt that I'm machshav, is not only osir for me, like the Tanna Kama says, Shimon Elazar holds my teaspoon of salt will be osir for everybody. Right? No, that's what we just discussed. Now, Reb Shimon is a different shita. When it comes to the minimum amounts, which means a teaspoon of salt, the Tanna Kama holds it's osir for everybody. Reb Shimon says no. Reb Shimon holds this teaspoon of salt that most people are machshav is only considered an isser of eitzah for most people. But for people who aren't machshav, what most people are machshav, for them it's still pot. And what about the half a teaspoon of salt? A half a teaspoon of salt that the Tanna Kama said is osher for everybody to carry. Reb Shimon holds the half a teaspoon. I apologize. The teaspoon of salt. The teaspoon of salt that the Tanna Kama said is osher for all people to carry. I hold the teaspoon of salt is only osher for the person who's machshavit. But the person who's not machshavit, even a teaspoon of salt would not be osher. And the missing piece of information here is Reb Shimon holds that the only shear that's osher for everybody is a revi'is. A revi'is is a threshold that everybody would be osher to carry that out. So those are the three shitas of our Mishnah. Okay, let's see the Gemara about it.
I'm sure you mentioned this, but I missed it. Are we talking in the case of the Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon, if they say that there's no liability. That is, you can carry it out. You're still carrying it out unwittingly. You don't know that this is in your pocket, for example. Or can you carry it out l'chatchila?
You should be able to carry it out. Oh, well, that's a very good question. The question is Chatzi Shir Asur in the Torah?
Right.
That is all. Is Chatzi Shir Asur in the Torah? That everybody holds Chatzi Shir is Asur in the Torah. The question is it Asur in the Torah for all types of things, or is it only Asur in the Torah for eating things? So the Chacham Tzvi holds that Chatzi Shir is only Asur in the Torah for food items that you're eating, where the Isser is an Achila. Is an Isser Achila if you're not allowed to eat a kazayis of a certain food, you're not allowed to eat a kazayis of nevela. So it's Midaraisa, you're not even allowed to eat a half a kazayis of nevela. It just means that if you eat a kazayis, then you hit the threshold where you would get malchus. But avad, you're not allowed to eat anything Midaraisa. According to the there's other Rishon, the Hagoyis Hashri. According to the Hagoyis Hashri, Chatzi Shir is Asur in the Torah even for other things as well, even for carrying things out. So according to the Hagoyis Hashri, carrying out less than the minimum amount is Asur Midaraisa, but there's no Chli of Chatzi for it. And according to the Chacham Tzvi, it wouldn't be Asur Midaraisa, it would only be Asur Midaraban. So anywhere you go, it's going to be Asur to do. The question is if it's Deraisa or Derabanan. But that has huge ramifications where there's an Eisat Tzorech, and there's other, and you ask them to go to do it. So the fact that it's Asur Midaraban is very significant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yossi, your example of a half a teaspoon and a full teaspoon. So the half a teaspoon is the item not stored, and a full teaspoon is on the right for a stored item.
That's right. That's right. So I'm just giving an example that's not necessarily true. It's something that's normally stored. I'm sorry, no. Item not stored means this person doesn't particularly care about it, but there's a minimum threshold of a teaspoon that normal people do store. Stored item means even if it's smaller than the normal threshold of a teaspoon, but this particular person holds on to it. So that's what these two columns means. Items not stored means even if I particularly don't machshav a teaspoon of salt, even if I'm not machshav a teaspoon of salt, since most people are, whether I store them or not is irrelevant, it's going to be Asur for everybody. But if it's something that I am machshav, so then it falls under this category. Does that make sense?
I'm not totally
So
on board.
let's go through. Let's go through it. Item not stored means are you machshav a teaspoon of salt? Let's say you're not. Let's say DYLive would throw out a teaspoon of salt. You wouldn't care about it. Zok to Tanakama, it doesn't matter. We don't care what DYLive thinks, because a teaspoon of salt, since most people do care about it, it's Asur for everybody to carry. So whether or not you store it or not is not relevant to me. Since most people do store it, therefore it's Asur for all people to carry out. However, let's say it's an amount that nobody would save. A half a teaspoon, nobody would save. If you happen to save it, then it will be Asur for you to carry. So this column is speaking about a teaspoon of salt, and this is speaking about less than a teaspoon of salt.
You have to put it in examples that David will understand. A piece of herring and half a piece of herring.
No, half a piece of herring is also chashuv by everybody.
Depends if you're poilish or not.
There's no shear of herring that everybody's not machshav.
It's not machshav. Oh, okay.
So you can't use herring as an example.
Victor hit the nail on the head. The problem he has is the Hungarian Polish problem.
There you go. Half a piece of herring left over from the kiddush on somebody else's plate.
Somebody else's plate. Okay.
Yanim's piece is always chashuv.
Okay, so let's just run through it one more time because it's a little complicated. If you have a full teaspoon of salt that most people value, according to the Tanakama, it's Asur for all people to carry. According to Reb Shimon, if you don't carry it, if even though everybody else saves a half teaspoon of salt, I don't care about a half teaspoon of salt. For you, it will be mutter, and for you, it's the threshold that across the board is Asur for everybody, whether they're machshav or not, is a revius, and that we're going to see in the next Mishnah. Reb Shimon ben Elazar did not express an opinion about that. Now, what about if it's a half a teaspoon of salt? So then, if you're machshav it, according to the Tanakama, then it will be Asur for you to carry. If you're not machshav it, then it's not Asur for you to carry. The Reb Shimon holds, no. Reb Shimon holds that it's always only usher for the person to carry. Meaning, it's usher for me to carry if I'm machshav it. However, my minimum threshold is not any amount. According to the Tanakama, even if I am machshav, even if I'm such a pilot that 1 granule of salt, by me is choshev, it's still going to be usher for me to carry it. Reb Shimon knows no. Even if you're cheap and you're going to machshav a granule of salt, it doesn't count. There's a minimum threshold as well. And the minimum threshold is something that most people would use. So if you're going to be machshav something that most people don't use, it's not even going to be usher for you, because you're crazy. If you're crazy enough to be machshav 1 granule of salt, that's not going to make it usher for you to carry. There's a minimum amount that even you, if you're machshav it, will be able to make it usher to you, and that will be, let's say, a teaspoon, which is what most people carry. Shimon also holds that if you're a polisher and you're even machshav 1 granule of salt, then nobody else can carry your granule of salt. Anybody else can carry their own granule of salt, but heaven help them if they move your granule of salt. Then they're going to be in trouble, because by you're able to be machshav your things that it'll impact everybody regarding your things. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. The Heilige Mishnah weiter. Hamoiti teven kamole pipara. If you carried, so till now we were discussing Michael Odo. Now we're discussing, or till now we were discussing general items. We're discussing food. Now we're discussing the halacha of itzah. What's the minimum threshold for animal feed? So amoiti teven kamoli pipara. If you take out enough straw that it's what would fill up the mouth of a cow, that's considered choshev. Now Rashi tells us right away. That a para, well, he doesn't say it over here. Okay, a para has a smaller mouth than a camel. A camel actually can eat more at one time, has a bigger mouthful than a cow. So mochi tevin kamoli pipara. If you took out straw, and it was enough straw to fill up the mouth of a para, that's a significant amount of straw that would be mechayiv you for itzah. But if it was eitzah, and Rashi tells us, the Gemara tells us what it is. It's some other type of straw from beans or something. That's something that a cow wouldn't eat. So therefore, if you took out, let's say a cow would eat 6 ounces. 6 ounces of eitzah wouldn't be usher, because you can't serve that to a cow. So you have to have eitzah kamala pigamel. If you wanted to use this lesser amount, this eitzah, you'd have to take out, let's say, 10 ounces, which is how much you could feed a gomel. Because eitzah will not be valuable unless it's enough that a gomel will eat it.
Isn't that a chetzi shir? That's a chetzi shir.
Why is that a chetzi shir? That's the full shir.
Because it's camel food, but it's not enough to feed a camel.
Eitzah kamala pi gomel will be usher, but eitzah kamala pi para will not be usher.
Right, because eitzah is food for a gomel, and you're not taking out enough to feed him. So
correct.
That
would be chetzi shir. That's correct. That's correct. So, as an aside, this eitzah is going to answer a problem that we had at Chumash. David Zolti would enjoy this. So I'm going to read for you a Rashi. It says, "Vayerash Elav Hashem ve'Eloinei Mamrei v'Hu Yoshev Pesach ha'Oil T'Chayim Hayoyim." What's the significance of Eloinei Mamrei? Zokt Rashi. Ve'Eloinei Mamrei Hu Shenosan Lo Eitzah Al Hamila L'Fichach Nigla Elav V'Chelpei. So everybody asks, Avram Avinu had to ask an eitzah if he shall listen to Hashem? So the Mefarshim answer different things. But the Cheskuni says, this eitzah wasn't advice. This eitzah was the same eitzah in our Mishnah. He gave him that type of straw because it was therapeutic. It helped him to help heal his wound. So he gave him some eitzah, which is this type of bran, this type of fiber to help it heal. So because he helped Avram heal, therefore, I see David smiling. Did you ever hear that pshat on the Cheskuni?
No, never heard it. But that's, who says it? Cheskuni.
The Cheskuni says it. He gave him eitzah. What's eitzah? Eitzah is animal feed.
There's a guy who goes for a pshat, you know? I'm a fan.
I loved it.
Yes, he's my president.
The whole kasha. No, I love a guy who comes a big lump to kasha, and then it diffuses the whole thing. She don't know what Eitzah means. Eitzah means straw. I'm sorry, Chansi, what did you say?
I was gonna say that Cheskuni is geschmack for me because he's my precedent to say Ein Mikra Yoitzi Midei Pshutoi.
Beautiful.
No, the truth is that that Eitzah as advice is pushed here. Rashi's not going to expect us to go unless Rashi's bringing down a Chazal, which he probably is.
Yeah.
But Rashi wouldn't expect us to think of this Eitzah, Eitzah is advice. So really, I mean, it's a creative solution.
It's a positive shot that's creative.
But I don't know if it's pshat.
He gave him both. First, he gave him the eitzah, and then he said, by the way, why don't you take some straw also?
No, that was the eitzah.
No, what happened was Avram Avinu told him, you told me to do this. I can't take the pain. I'm going out of my mind. You got me into this. You got to get me out of it. So then he gave him another eitzah, which was the therapeutic, the halbilim.
Hast noch chickens?
Okay,
Yes,
something right.
I just want to clarify, just to point out, what Avigdor said about the gummel and the cow. Really, the eitzah is probably a substance that is not as dense.
It's a lower grade food that a cow wouldn't eat.
Right. Well, a cow would eat it, but you need more of it in order to get.
No, a cow wouldn't eat it.
But it's a larger volume, right?
No,
Okay.
a cow wouldn't eat it. A gummel is not as picky an eater as a cow.
I see.
But a gummel will eat it, but a gummel needs to eat more. So if its only significance is because it's gummel feed, then you have to provide a quantity that a gummel needs. Okay, so let's see what the Mishnah says.
If even a cow wouldn't eat it, Avram would put it for in the
It's basically like most eitzahs that you get,
Okay. Or Eitzah Kamala Pigamo. Okay, now we're speaking about a new substance. So we spoke now about the relationship between the size of the gamel's mouth, which is larger than the size of the par's mouth. Now we're talking about other things. Amir, Kamali Plitle. If you use Amir, Rashi's Kashim Shal it's also some type of straw. That would be if you have enough to the mouth of a tle, which is smaller than the mouth of a d. I'm sorry, a tle is bigger than the mouth of a d. A sovim Kamali Pigdi. I guess grass is a higher grade food, and that you could take a smaller amount will be choshev, even if it's only the size of the mouth of a gdi, because a tle has a bigger mouth than a gdi. Okay, ale shum. Thank you very much. Ale shum va'ale betzol. These are the green leaves that grow out of garlic and onions. The part that grow above ground that you would pull them out of the ground with. Lachim, if they're moist, then they're edible by people, Rashi says. And therefore, kegroigus, the shear is kegroigus, because that's the shear of all foods. When it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, it has to be the shear of a groigus. But yeveshim, if they're dried, when they no longer can be eaten by humans, then kamali pigdi. Then they're only good feed for a gedi, and therefore you have to have enough to fill the mouth of the gedi. Period. Now, we have a new halacha in the Mishnah. The ein mitzarchen zemze. You cannot mix the different foods together and get a share of them combined. Because they all have different shiurim as to how much they need. So one thing that's interesting to note is the Pnei Yeshua, I believe, speaks out that when it comes to human feed, it's always a gregorious. It doesn't matter what type of food it is. Yet when it comes to animal food, it depends on what it is. Really, by humans, it should be the same thing. Different types of food items have a different chashivas in different quantities. You're definitely a serving size of orange juice is definitely going to be much different than a serving size of vodka. So why is there not that distinction? So Pnei Yeshua says that we all know shiurim are halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and the Groiger shear was dictated halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The shear for animal feed was halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's just that it's a shear of what's choshev, and that can be assessed by Chazal in each period of time what's considered chashuv at that time. But the halacha Moshe Sinai regarding human food was a hard shear that's not holy in anything other than the Xeris HaKosov or the halacha Moshe Sinai. Okay, let's see the Hilig Gemara. My Eitzah, what is this Eitzah? Amar Buddha, Teven Shalmini kidneys. It's the straw that's part of a bean plant, and I guess it's very low grade food. Ki Asher Abdimi Amar, and Abdi came, he said, Amoichi Teven Kamali Pipara Lagamal, if someone took out Teven straw enough to feed a para, but he took it out for a gamal. So he was taking it for the gamal. So he didn't take out enough for a gamal because a gamal needs more. But he took out enough for a para, but he was feeding it to a gamal. So Reb Yochanan Amar Chayiv, Reb Yochanan holds Yuli Chayiv, Reb Shimon ben Lakish Patur. But Orta, in the evening, Amar Reb Yochanan Hachi. Reb Yochanan said Chayiv when he was asked this shaila in the evening. The tzarfer in the yes.
Sorry, what if he took it out for Gamal and then he changed his mind?
Well, let's get to there, but let's first discuss this case. After we discuss this case, then together we'll figure out, because I didn't even think about that. So let's figure out what this case is, and then we'll build to the next case. So let's do that. So that's what happened that night. The tzarfer, when the Yochanan woke up and he had a chance to sleep on it, he backed out, and Reb Yochanan also agreed that you're a potter. Reb Yosef, so Reb Yosef said, Shaper Oba the Hadar. I think Reb Yochanan made the right move, changing from Chayiv to potter. You know why? Because the halach chazi l'gamal. The fact of the matter is, this is not enough feed for a gamal, so it doesn't have chashivas, and therefore it should not be usher to carry out. Amalei Abaye said that makes no sense at all. Adarabba, kidimei ikar mistaber. It's much more mistaber to say that it's chayiv. You know why? The chazi l'para, because it's good for a pork. It's not relevant what I'm doing with that food right now. We're just looking at a shear. What is the shear? What's the minimum shear that if you carry it out, you're going to be chayiv? Well, how do we decide what the minimum shear is? We look at what a serving size is. A serving size of teven is kamala pipara. It's not relevant what I'm doing with it. Why should it be relevant? It's a shear. And the reason why it has chashivas is because it's enough to feed a cow. What I'm doing with it should not be relevant. So Zok Abaye, it's much more mistaber to say chayiv because that's the shear. Zok Rashi, the chazal apart. Hilchach shear chashavu. Ulachol mishetzienu lepakas yirvachi. It doesn't make a difference who's taking it out and what you're taking it out for. The fact is you're carrying out something chashuv. So it's pashut that it's chayiv. And I think that's so pashut, I don't have to swear, how can you say potter? Just because you happen to be feeding it to a gamal, that changes the fact that this is a significant amount of teven. So if you think about it.
Sorry, why don't we change the shear smaller for a calf, for a gedi or whatever?
We're not talking about animal food. We're talking about when we look at teven, what is a significant amount of teven? So Chazal said what gives teven significance is its serving size. And so you're
serving
asking me
size
why
depending on the animal.
No, I understand. So you want to know why did we pick para when we discuss the serving size and not a baby animal?
Right.
I guess because Chazal made an assessment that when you're evaluating what a serving size of food is, you look at a normal full-size animal, and you look at a normal full-size animal who is the typical eater of this food. So it's hard for me to answer why they picked a cow that was 2 years old versus a calf that was 6 months old. I don't know the answer to that, but I hear the logic that they look at full-grown animals and they look at different types of foods and they see this feed is normally served to this type of animal. What's the serving size for this type of animal? That's how we're going to establish that this is the shear that it's also. The question is why
a calf is still suckling from its mother for quite a while. Before it can even take a decent size of shear. So
whatever it is, because Chazal wanted to base it on an adult, and not even an adult male, an adult female. It's para, not par. So,
Yeah, but Reish Lakish obviously learns the Mishnah differently. That those are very specific to those specific animals.
it doesn't make sense to say that because we know Tevin, let's say 6 ounces of Tevin is a choshev b'shir. That's the amount of Tevin that you would feed to a cow. So just because you want, what if you don't want to feed it to a cow? What if you want to take that amount and you want to throw it on the floor? So that you should be potter because of that?
Well, that's what Reish
What do
Lakish
I care what you're doing with it?
Because he holds that the Mishnah is very literal. It's very specific. 6 ounces of Tevin for a cow is usher.
Yeah, but
6
what's the
ounces of
logic of
Tevin-
that?
6
We're
ounces
looking-
of Tevin for a gomel is potter.
What's
what he
the
holds.
what's the
No
logic?
one takes a Mishnah literally. Chazal,
The logic is go back to the reason why it's even usher in the first place. For that, you're just focusing only on the shiurim.
I hear.
But it,
So Reb Elvin spoke out an interesting thought. Since it's meleches machsheves osra Torah, so you see that when it comes to Shabbos, we do look at my intent, because you could take the same ma'isa, and if I have the intent to do it, it's a melacha that you're mischaven for, and it's osra. And if I don't intend to do it, then it's not a meleches machsheves, which supports really what Shlomi Feinberg is saying. Look, I'm sure on Shabbos, the Balt Machshava is very much part of what you need for a chiyuv, for a malacha. It makes sense to say that what I'm doing with it now might actually impact the shear that it should be, which is really what Shlomi has been saying, I think.
It really, yes, what it is
Shlomi saying it should be part of what
product.
I'm using it for. I'm just adding one component to support that.
no, Rabbi
You
Elvin
see how
said it much
Shabbos
better.
Machshava counts.
Rabbi
Sorry?
Elvin said it much better than me.
I don't think so. No, Reb Elephant, if you needed enough to feed an elephant, it would be a much bigger shear.
And it's similar to that case with we had a couple of Mishnayos ago with the Zrika, right? He intended to throw a 2 or 4, and that's not machlokes. But did I do it or did I not do it? Did I do the action or not do the action?
Right, so there you did a ma'aseh, but your machshava, since I only want to shoot it, throw it to a chayv. So you see machshava plays a role, and maybe that's what the machlokes of Rechon and Rishlakish is.
So I just for some clarity here, we're talking about taking out an amount of cow feed for an animal, for a gamel. And so this is a different, the category of food is for a para, but we're going to, ostensibly feed it to a camel.
But a gomel would eat what a parrot eats.
It's a
It's
higher
higher grade
quality
food.
food. It's a
Right.
better quality food. You get more energy out of it.
Right. So the question is it totally in the thing itself that you're carrying out, the type of food, or is it totally in the thing that you're doing it for? That's what the focus is.
That's
Is that
exactly. It's exactly. That's a clear way of expressing the machlokes.
Okay.
That's
Thank you.
very good. Very good point. Okay, let me now let's together discuss what Dubi brought up. So this is the case is where I'm taking out cow food and I'm serving a camel.
Sorry, just one more question. Would that not be the same as the machlokas between Reb Shimon and Reb Shimon ben Elazar?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's identical, but
It's similar.
you could use the
There's a
same
parallel
svaras
there.
maybe. So I want to say this same svara of you look at the machshava, or do you look at what he's actually doing, would also be a svara to explain the machlokes of Shimon and Elazar. It's a very good art. It's a very good art. So Dubi wanted to know. So our Gemara is talking about a case where I took out feed for it was designed for a part and took it out for a gobble. So Dubi asked me, what happens if I took out cow feed and I intended to serve it to a cow, and then I changed my mind? Was that your shiloh?
That was my shaila. And according to Reb Yechon, who said it was potter, would he still say it's potter?
So if I took it out, if when I originally carried it out, my intent was to serve it to a cow, then for sure it should be chayv.
I think it was a
my
reverse.
intent was reverse. It was my intent was to serve a camel, but it wasn't enough for a camel. So Reb Yochanan says it's
And
potter.
then I changed my mind. And
Then I
used it
changed
for
my
a cow.
mind and want to give it to a cow,
Right.
and it's enough for a cow.
So it should
But he
probably be
still
the same
says
machlokes.
potter.
At the time I took it out, if my intent counts, at the time that I took it out, my intent was for the camel. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. So Reb Yochanan changed his mind in the morning, and Abaye says you shouldn't have changed his mind. I believe it should be high. Elok, he also Ravin Omar. Hamoji Tevin Kamal Pi Para Lagomel. If someone took out enough Tevin for a para, but he took it out for a gomel, the shayla that we have here, the Chula Amaloi Pligi Dichayev. Everybody would agree that it's chayev. Ki Pligi, where is there machlokes? The Moitzi Eitza Kamali Pi Para Lepara. If you took out Eitza, which is camel feed, but you only took out enough to serve it to a para. That's where there might be a machlokes. The Ibcha Itmar, and it's exactly the opposite. Rabbi Yochanan or Potter, Rabbi Yochanan is Potter, because that's not a, you look at the food, at the share of the food, it has to be enough for a gomel. The Shlokish are chayiv, because I myself, my machshava is to use it for feed, so maybe it should be mechayiv me. And as I learned this, it makes even more sense what Avigdor is saying, that there's a little bit of a link between this and the machlokes we had at Reb Shimon Elazar before, because you see clearly that since I'm machshuv this amount or this type of food for this type of animal, it would be mechayiv. Rabbi Yochanan or Potter, because achila al yidei atchak lo yishma achila. If it's not normal achila, therefore we don't consider achila, and therefore it won't make it. It won't make the shear, even though I think it should, even though I am using it. Because achila al yidei atchak shma achila. That's called an achila. It's called an achila because I want to use it. But it's interesting to note that when the Gemara expresses the reason, the Gemara doesn't say the reason is because to me it's something. The Gemara says the reason is because achila ydet kak is considered an achila. So it's almost like he's arguing on the whole concept of that shear. Zok the hele Gemara weiter. Omer kamali pitla. So this is some type of straw. You need enough to fill the mouth of a cloud, which is bigger than the mouth of a gdi. For the Gemara, Vatani Kegroigris, we learned that the amount of omer has to be the share of a groigris. Zok the Gemara, idi v'idi chachiru. Mali pitla. And groigris is the same. Correct Toisvis, so then let it say groigris. That's a shear that we're more familiar with. So Zok Toisvis, but the nakat mamasisin kamala pitla. But a nakat ke groigris is to teach us lashvinon the mishum achilas ple nasnu boy chachamim shear. The Mishnah wanted us to know that the reason why we picked that shear is because there is an animal that the shear groigris is exactly the serving size. The nakat ke groigris, if it would have just said ke groigris, like haviyadinon lama nasnu by chachamim shear, we would not have known the reasoning behind the chachamim for the shear groigris. By saying it's mali pigdi, then it's also telling us that this shear was selected because this is the serving size of a typical animal, a gedi, that would eat this type of feed. Amar Beis Bachanina, ein mitzdarfen. So we have to focus on this. Ale shum va'ale b'tzelem lachem is kegregris. V'yaveshem is kamali pegdi. The Gemara is not commenting on that. But then the final statement, the ein mitzdarfen zemzeh, you may not be mitzaref the different feeds to reach the shear. Because they have different shear. So now we need to get some clarification. So to the more Omer Beis Bachanina, that we say ein mitzarfen is laomer shabeh, which means let's say you have teven, which is a higher grade feed. A smaller amount is going to be usher to carry. But a lower grade feed, such as Eitzah, you need a bigger amount. So let's put numbers on. Let's say you need 6 ounces of Tevin and you need 8 ounces of Eitzah. So let's say I only had 5 ounces of Tevin. Could I mix in 1 ounce of Eitzah? So I'll have now 5 ounces of Tevin supplemented with 1 ounce of Eitzah, total 6. There's for sure not mitzaref. Because Eitzah, you need more of normally. So that's what it means, ein mitzaref l'cham. Ein mitzaref l'cham shebehen, if I want to fill the shear of 6 ounces, which is how much Tevin I need, and I only have 5 ounces of Tevin, if I added 1 ounce of Eitzah, that for sure will not push it over the threshold of Isser. Now, you might ask, what's the chiddush of that? That's pashut. Why in the world should it work? You need 6 ounces of teven. So Tosha speaks out. You might think that v'chein chomer l'kal kol teven leitza l'mal l'pigamo afilo teven roy l'gamo shema agav ha'etza huroy. Maybe since they're mixed together, it will be roy, but that's not. Tosha is referring to something else. So let's go back to it. Aim and start from the chomer shabehen. So that, again, if you need normally 6 ounces of teven, and you would need 8 ounces of etza, and you only had 5 ounces of teven, if you supplemented it with 1 ounce of etza, that would not make it usher. However, our motztarfin lekal shebehen. The tzirf is lekal shebehen, meaning you need 8 ounces of etza to be a critical mass that it should be usher to carry. Well, what if I only had 7 ounces of etza, but I had 1 ounce of teven together with it? Could the teven supplement the etza? And that's what Reb Yossi is saying, that the teven could supplement the etza. Tosha asks here, even if a gomel would not eat teven, shema agav etza hu royu. Mixed in other words, a gomel would normally eat etza, but if you mix in a small amount of teven, the gomel would consider eating it as well. So that's the shayla. If I need 8 ounces of etza and I don't have 8 ounces of etza, I only have 7 ounces, and it was supplemented with 1 ounce of teven. Now we have a full 8 ounces. Would that be enough that now it's going to be usher to carry? So the Gemara says that it is mitzar. So that the Mishnah says it's not mitzar is only l'chamer shebehen l'chumer, but l'kal shebehen it would be mitzar. So again, 1 ounce of teven would be able to supplement 7 ounces of etza. Frek the Gemara. Are you saying that they could be mitzaref? Because we are saying that lakal shoben, they're mitzaref. Is that true? I'm going to prove to you that whenever things have different shiurim, they could never be combined. But none. Habeged gimel al gimel. The halach is the minimum size beged that's matama tumas mishka b'moshev. So any beged that a zov or a nida or zova puts their weight on, whether they touched it or not, it becomes tummy mitumas moshe, mishkav and moshe. So a beged, how big does a beged have to be in order to be mekabel this tumah? And the reason why there's a shear of a beged is because the only things that are matana b'mishkav and moshe are things that would normally be used for mishkav and moshe. Something that's not normally used for mishkav and moshe would not be subject to the tumas mishkav and moshe. So what size beged do you need that we say it's royu for mishkav and moshe? So a beged would be gimel al gimel. It would be 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim, so approximately 12 inches by 12 inches. But a sack, if it was a sackcloth, which is less valuable, it's not considered something that people would rest on unless it's dalet al dalet. But or if it's leather, it would be hay al hay. It would be 5 tvachim by 5 tvachim. And mappets, if it was a mat of reeds, vov al vov. So there's different shiurim for different types of begodim of what makes their minimum shear to be metamaden with mishkav and moshe. So these have different shiurim. The Tanya law, habeged vasak, beged and sak are mitzaref to each other. Sak va'or are mitzaref to each other. Or va'mapet is all mitzarefin zem zeh. Va'amar Reb Shimon said, matam, why are they mitzaref? Is mepnei shiru'uyin litame moshav. It's because they could all be matama moshav, and Rashi tells us what that means is if you made a patch out of them, even though it was only a tefach al tefach, that patch would be tummy. So you could combine these different things together. Beged and sak you can combine together in one patch. You can combine sak and or together in one patch. So since they can combine to be part of one patch, that's why we say that even for these larger shiurim, they're mitzaref. So I just want to clarify. I said a patch, tefach al tefach, is matama moshav. How is that consistent with the gimel al gimel or the dalal al dalal? So the mission that's talking about gimel al gimel means any cloth that's 3 by 3, whether you have any intent to use it for anything or not, just lying around, that has a status of moshav no matter what you're using it for. So for a beged, it's gimel al gimel, for a sak, it's dalal al dalal. But what if I need a patch? and I specifically cut out a patch to use for a patch, then even if it's only one tefach by one tefach, it has a cheshivus of a beged for mishkav v'moshav, because there I'm actually setting it aside. I'm specifying it. I'm actually making it specifically to be a patch. So therefore, even a tefach al tefach will be metama b'tumas moshav. But the brayso that says you need larger shiurim are speaking about just a piece of cloth lying around that you didn't specifically purpose for anything. So Reb Shimon says, why do we allow us to combine beged and sak for the shear, or sak for the shear? That's because you find when it comes to a patch of tefach al tefach, that patch can also be made out of multiple different cloths combined together. So there's a special reason. There's a special reason why, when it comes to begodim, you allow different sizes, different minim of different shiurim to be mitzaref. So that tells us time of the ruin l'tamei moshe. There's a specific reason Reb Shimon says why over there it could be mitzaref, which means that the default is that it can't be mitzaref. Aval ein royu l'tamei moshe v'loy. Clearly, by default, you do not mix different minim with different shiurim. Only when it comes to tumas mishkav, because they can all combine for a tefach al tefach tumah, that's why they combine. So Ibazai, how could you say over here that you could supplement an ounce of teven for an ounce of eitzah and it'll be good? Even when it comes to animal feed, we also could combine them. When would you combine? When would you combine the different feeds? If I was a merchant and I sold animal feed, I had a pet store where I sold animal feed, so I would take a little tiny bit of each, even though it's less than what a normal animal would eat, and I pile them all together to get some critical mass. Rashi says it so they shouldn't blow away in the wind, right? He'd pile all his different feeds up in one pile to advertise to people walking by that I have stock in my store of all these different types of animal feeds. And I'm happy to mix them all together, and I don't want to individually separate each species and put on my window. The Adi de Zutri, since each little piece is so small, I'm afraid it'll blow away in the wind. So I take all the different stock that I have in my store, the straw and this and that, pile it into one pile and put it there. So you see people combine things. Since people combine things, that's why you could say.
Yossi, it's like adding filler to a burger. It's like you put the cheap stuff with the expensive stuff.
No, it's like buying. It's like getting a everything bagel.
Well, like buying cleaning detergents that they mix it together.
You don't do that.
That's because they're all the same. They're just in different shaped bottles. Is this machlokas that Reb Shimon holds here? Is this the same we had previously? When the Gemara brought the Mishnah and Kalim to talk about what the Ani and the Usher held regarding the size of the cloth.
Well, that's talking about Tumas Mace.
That was Tumas Mace.
Right.
Was it Reb Shimon in that machlokas also?
I don't remember.
But Reb Shimon's my guy.
So let me ask you a question. How much, if you want to eat chicken, how much chicken do you have to eat to be able to make a bracha bread?
How much water do you have to drink?
I'm sorry?
How much water do you have to drink?
That was my next question. How much water do you have to drink to make a barney flesh?
I never knew you had to make a barney flesh until recently on water. I don't know, for some reason I didn't think you did.
I think you have to drink a revius to make a barney flesh. And I think you have to eat a kazayas to be able to make a barney flesh. So the question is, could you be mitzaref a half a revius of water with a half a kazayas of chicken to make a barney flesh? So from our Gemara, you see clearly that you cannot. So Rav Moshe actually makes a ruling. What if you eat vegetable soup and there's vegetables in it and there's liquid in it, but you between the two of them combined, you have a shear? You can't make a bracha achronim. You cannot combine foods with liquids to make a bracha achronim. So you have to eat more.
Is that the same? Is that the same for mazonos? I thought that by mazonos, that make a mazonos even if the amount of flour it has to combine with the other things that are in the cake. So you've got flour and eggs and sugar and everything together, and so you go by the volume of the final product, not the volume of the flour.
Are you talking about the bracha achrona?
Yeah, the bracha achrona.
I mean, even if I don't have a kezayis of mazonis, there's sugar, there's fruit, there's meringue, there's custard, but you look at the final product.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know the halachas.
It's the same thing with soup. There's always liquid in a soup. That's how you make soup.
Right, so you'd have to, in order to make a very pashas on soup, you'd have to either have a revius of the liquids or a kazayis of the solids. But if you have a half a revius of the liquids and half a kazayis of the solids, you would not be able to make a very pashas.
Makes sense, because the final product is a soup. That's what you want. And that together is a separate entity. And
so you're saying the solids in the soup, the pieces of carrot in the vegetable soup, should be bottled to the water.
One is bottled to the other. I don't know which one. But what bracha would you make on a vegetable soup?
On the vegetable soup, I think you make hadama.
But why? So the water is bottled to the vegetable.
The veggies.
But it is one entity.
So the question would be, what if you only had a kazayas of the liquid, of the broth, of the vegetable soup? That would be the question.
So that you for sure cannot make a bracha.
Generally, on vegetable soup, would you not make two brachas?
I don't know. Reb Elvin said you'd make hadama in vegetable soup.
That's it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Would it matter if it's pureed versus it's distinct?
There's an
Probably
ikr
doesn't
tuffle.
matter.
The liquid is tuffle to the vegetables, which are the ikr, no?
Yeah, that's probably why I make hadama. And I think it probably doesn't matter if it's pureed. We're talking about if there are vegetables in it.
The issue you run into is if you have a vegetable soup that has noodles in it. So then you make two brachas, right? Because you're watching both.
Yeah. Okay, let's see the Helig Mishnah about there. Human food is always a gregus. Chayev, u'mitzarfen zemzeh, and different foods are mitzaref. It doesn't matter if you're eating herring or if you're eating honey. They're both the same shear. The reason why I picked herring and honey is because he actually, one of the DYLive actually talks about the dafke herring and honey. Let me see who talks about herring and honey. He brings down the
two things that you never combine together.
That's right. But he says about they would be mitzaref because if it has all the same shear, there's no problem. Okay, so let's see what it says weiter. What doesn't count is the shell. The shell does not count. So if you're carrying out nuts, the shell doesn't count. The garineim, you don't count the mass of the seed. So if you're carrying out an avocado, the mass of the seed doesn't count. Buksein, the mass of the stem doesn't count. The suban is the bran, it's called the coarse bran, which actually is the shell of the wheat kernel, and murson is the fine bran, which we call wheat germ. So those two parts do not count as part of the food. However, the Achronim speak out. I believe, who did he quote it from? He might have quoted from Moshe, but he quoted from the Chashuch Kemet. The Chashuch Kemet says this was in the olden days where only the poor people, the wealthy people didn't eat bran. But now that everybody eats whole bran, if anything, whole bran or whole grain bread is a mila, so nowadays subad and morsan would actually be added, be considered part of the shear. The klipe adoshim, which are cooked with them, they do count. Are you saying that the bran is not mitzaref to the shear of what would prohibit you to carry, which is the shear groigers, but none chameshes revoim kemach void. If you have 5 revoim of kemach, what is a reva? So let me go back to my ka'askel of Yigudu. A lug is a quarter of a cow. So chamesh revoim means 5 lugs. 5 lugs and a drop more is chayov and b'chala. And in Chiyuv Chala, we conclude Hein, Visugun, Umersanon. So you see that is part of the food, that is part of the flour, because it's nageh to be mitzaref to the shir for a Chiyuv of Chala. Amar Abaye, you cannot equate a Chiyuv Chala with the Malach of Shabbos. Because the reason why it's mitzaref for the Chiyuv Chala is shekin ani oichel pitoi be'isa belusa. An ani would eat his bread with a mixed and not purified flour, but wealthy people would only eat purified flour. And when it comes to carrying on Shabbos, it has to be a choshev ashir, and it's not a choshev ashir when you include in it the bran. That's what Rashi says. Belusa, a poor person will eat isa belusa, whoever's besugna ubemursana. Hilchach lechem haaretz karinabe. It's called lechem haaretz, and that's really the only qualification you need for the chiyuv chala. Immediately in Shabbos, midi the choshev. It has to be a choshev thing, not just what anybody would eat. And typically these are not oichel. Again, that was in those days. Nowadays things have changed.
How is this different than Machlokes from before with Reb Shimon and the other Mishnah?
Well, we're discussing if the wheat germ and if the bran are considered part of the wheat or if it's just like a shell.
So yeah, but you're bringing up the ani. So what about, and you're differentiating between an ani and what's chashuv. So why is that different here?
Because I believe here what Rashi is saying is you need a davar chashuv, which means something that most people value. So since most people only value the white wheat and don't value the bran, therefore it's not called something significant. There we're talking about when we're talking about salt. So you want to say since only a poor person would be machshav a small amount, so only 1 second. So I hear what you're saying. Over there the Mishnah said if a poor person is machshav a smaller amount, that becomes choshev and that becomes usher to carry.
But it's something
So
that
you want
everyone's
to know why over
machshav
here since to an ani this is important, why aren't you machshav? I hear.
Yeah.
The answer that I would say is very simple. The answer is that when we're talking about other products, not food products that have exer shekosov or halacha Moshe B'Sinai of groigris, so there it's all dependent on the shiurim of how Chazal assessed it. But groigris is a prescriptive amount that all human feed has when it comes to itzah. So when it comes to the sheer groigris, you might not necessarily look at each person what he's machshiv. Rather, you look at what's considered choshev and developed, because we're not basing that all. The whole shear of groigris is not based on because that's what people are machshiv. It's based on a prescriptive xeris choshev of groigris. Now we're just trying to say what goes into the sheer groigris.
So the other Mishnah was not talking about oichel. You just used the teaspoon of salt as an example.
That's right. It's talking about any product, right? The Gemara was looking at dam nida and that atzei asera. So we're just talking about standard products. So I could have used 2x4s as an example.
Okay.
But I hear the two still, and I don't know that the difference that I made is a valid difference. But the two still is very good. Why over there do you look at how each person assesses it? At least according to one time of the Mishnah. Now here you don't have that. So that's a good child.
Okay.
Reb Yehuda Omer chutz miklipa adashim amaspashal shimon. Adashim in pulim loy. Even he agrees dafka klipa adashim count, but not pulim, because pulim are mitzar. I'm sorry, pulim are not mitzar. Frekti Gemara vatanya Reb Yehuda Omer chutz miklipa pulim ve'adashim. So in one case, Reb Yehuda says that the peels of pulim do count, and in one place says they don't count. How do you make them to agree with each other? L'kasher habachadi habatiki. Newer, younger pulim, they have softer shells, and therefore they'd be mitzaref to the bean to be part of this year. But atiki no, atiki my time aloy. Amravavov the shenirin kisvuvin bekar. The older pulim, their klipin look like little black flies, so people don't like them, so they would be thrown out. So because of that, they're not mitzaref to this year. How do you know lach l'agado? Okay, now we're going to look at drinks. So till now we were discussing the shear of food. Now we're going to look at the shear of drinks. How much wine do you have to be mochi? It's kedei mizigas hakos. Enough of mizigas hakos. And Rashi says, what does that mean? It's kishir shanoisin yayin chayil soich kos Normally, they would add 3 parts water to 1 part wine. So the amount of pure wine you have to put in is enough that when you put in the other 3 parts, you'd have a full kos. How much that full kos is, we're going to see soon. Cholav, how much milk do you have to have? Kidei give me a mouthful. Dvash, how much honey? Kidei litin ala kosas. The animals, where they put their loads, it would create raw skin there. It would irritate their skin, so they would smear honey on these areas. It seems almost like honey is not even used as a food item. Shem oil, kidei lasach aver cotton, to smear a small aver. What aver that is, the Gemara is going to tell us later. Mayim, how much water is the minimum? Kidei loshav and sekilar, enough water that you could mix it with the powder that you would make the ointment for a wound with. The shar kol mashkin, and all other mashkin is biravias. The revius is this year. The chol hashoifen, and any gray water is also biravias. Gray water is water that you washed with already, so it's not clean water. Shimon Omer, kulon biravias. All the shiurim, when it comes to liquids, they're all revius. They're all the same. And this is the Reb Shimon that we were talking about before. Well, that you have all these shiurim are less than the revius. All these shiurim that we said, both in this Mishnah and in the previous Mishnah, are only for people who are machshiv, smaller, lesser values than the revius. Those people alone will have an isser to carry those things out, because those people alone have a chshivas. But the hamoinam, it's revius. So the shear across the board is revius. If you have any less than a revius, and if you're makbid on it, then for you it's counted. That's Reb Shimon Shita. Of course, the Tanakama Shita is this is for everybody. The Tanakama holds this is for everybody. That's the same machlokes that we discussed before. The Tanakama holds these minimum shiurim are for everybody, and for someone who's cheap, even less than these minimum shiurim would have a cheshivus. According to Reb Shimon, this is the shear for the cheap people. Less than this, even a cheap person does not give it a cheshivus. And these for a rich person who's not machshav these amounts, these would not be able to carry. And Reb Shimon's threshold is revius.
So liquids is not considered oichel. So is devash an oichel? Because I'm just saying, based on your svar, what you answered me before, would that hold? Based on this Mishnah here.
I'm not understanding what you're saying. Well, first of all,
about cheshivas for what's subjective, whether it's a rich person or a poor person, right? So here again, we're saying, like our first Mishnah, that it depends on what your cheshivas is, right? What's chashiv to you?
You're right, and this is right. So these are things that. So you have a good point, because some of these things you're eating, and some of these things you're not eating.
Right. So that's your svar from before. It doesn't.
I'm not sure because. By mashkin, there is no the shear groigris, which was a prescriptive shear.
Right. So what's devash? Devash is mashkin?
I guess so. I guess it's considered as a mashkin. Oh, so that's why you preceded what you said.
Right.
What is devash? I hear.
Right.
Yeah, because you're right. Because this goes right back into the same morass of what I'm mashkin and what I'm not, and we only took a break from it up here with that one Mishnah talking about oil. Very good point. Okay. Excellent. I didn't even think of that. Excellent. Tom is up to Gilmore. Today, mizigas kois yafa. What does it mean a kois? How big is a kois? It's a kois yafa. Umay kois yafa. What is a kois yafa? Kois shel bracha. It's a kois shel bracha. Zokt the heilige Rashi, very important. Kois shel bracha birchas hamazon. We're talking about a kois that you would use for birchas hamazon. Shetzrichu chachamim liyafaisa. It's called a kois yafa because chachamim in the Gemara brachas that we learned, they require that you make this kois beautiful. There's like 10 items, but Rashi only lists 6 of them. And these are the 6 items. Itor means it has to be surrounded. Either it means like the person who makes the birchas hamazon should be surrounded by his talmidim, or it means you should have small koishes sitting around the big kois, like a lot of people have in their kiddush set. The itof means you have to wear your hat and jacket when you bench for mezuzah. You have to wear your hat and jacket. There's a chshivas. If anybody listened to Rabbi Frankel's rant yesterday, one of his tainas is that when they went to invite him to be a rav, the people came not dressed in a hat and jacket, which is not a respectful way to invite a rav. Hadocha, you have to rinse out the becher on the inside. Ushtifa, you have to rinse out the becher on the outside. Chai, you have to have raw wine. Umoli, it has to be a full kois. Okay, Zog to Gemara weiter. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Hua, Koshel Bracha, how much does there have to be in it? Sorach Shehei Boi, Roiva Revius. You have to have a quarter of a revius of raw wine, Kadeshi Zagenu, the Yamid al Revius. So that when you add 3 parts of water to the 1 part of raw wine, you'll have a total of a revius. A revius is the shear that you need. What is it a revius of? Rashi, a revius halug. So a revius halug, we know from our Ka'askalav Yugudu code, is that a lug is 4 eggs. If you need a quarter of an egg, you need a quarter of 6 eggs. Quarter of 6 eggs is 1.5 eggs. So the shear revius is the size of 1.5 eggs, and we all know there's a million shittas of how many ounces that is. And I guess we can stop here. I'm not even sure what time is it. How are we doing for time? Oh, it's very late.
40.
Good. So we'll
Yossi, who is this Rabbi Frankel you're talking about?
Oh boy.
Rabbi Frankel.
Oh boy.
Rabbi
boy.
Frankel. He's a very, very chushav. He's a Rav of a
Turn off the recording, Akiva.
His
Akiva, turn off
father-
the recording.
One second.
His father is the Viala